Talk radio was a project that Stone signed up to do in between getting his own projects off the ground. Not many people have seen it, but it's no less interesting than any of his more successful films. It's a look into the life of a controversial radio personality who regularly insults ignorant and bigoted listeners who drive him crazy with their perverted enjoyment of his program. By all accounts, though, this isn't as much Oliver Stone's film as it is Eric Bogosian's film. Bogosian wrote the movie's screenplay, with some input from Stone, basing it on his original theater piece, which was in turn based on the life of Alan Berg. Bogosian also plays the lead role of Barry Champlain, and frankly, I don't think anyone else could have played that role so well. Barry Champlain is a man plagued with doubt over what he's actually accomplishing with provoking these bigots. There's also a seemingly suicidal dismissal of danger to his own self. His actions get more and more erratic until he invites a wild-eyed drug-using youth to come into the station and sit next to him for an on-the-air discussion, completely on the fly. The movie mostly takes place in the studio, the biggest exceptions being a moment where Barry is identified at a public event and a long flashback sequence dealing with Barry's big start on radio. Eric Bogosian is the brainchild behind this, and he's the one carrying the film. His interactions with the rest of the cast define their characters, and there really are very few scenes that don't directly involve Barry. That said, there are some great supporting performances in this film, by such actors as Alec Baldwin, Leslie Hope, Ellen Green, Michael Wincott, and recurring Stone collaborator John C. McGinley. The movie aims to say something about what it means to make use of the First Amendment and the consequences that can come out of it. Barry insults people daily, pointing out how small-minded many of his listeners are, and he seems oblivious to the death threats that he receives. The callers themselves range from a woman who is so scared of the outside world that she'll barely even consider going outside, to a number of anti-Semites who preach that Barry is doomed and that he has signed his own death warrant. Barry himself plays up the persona of a man who sees through the greed and the corruption, denouncing it over the air, and in the third act of the film, Barry's producers get word of a deal to give him much wider distribution. A representative comes in to see the show personally, but other events in Barry's life push him over the edge to give one of the greatest monologues I've ever seen in a movie. He's regretful, he's self-loathing, he's angry, he's horrified, and by the end of the monologue, he's spent. And his final line in the scene defines what he feels about himself, and thanks to Eric Bogosian's acting and Oliver Stone's direction, it's a very tense scene with a lot of suspense behind it. Talk radio is probably the least known of the films in Stone's golden age, and that's a shame because I think it's a compelling film that deserves attention. It's hard to get a hold of these days, and it took me years before I could find a rental store that had a copy of it. But if you can find it, I highly recommend it. While the brainchild of the story is ultimately Eric Bogosian, one cannot deny Stone's involvement in the film and his own influences upon its production.